This is a Ben Frank Connection presentation.
What is going on, everybody? We are back for another episode of ABJ Presents Tornado Tag, episode 119, the history of the Shockmaster. No, Ole Anderson.
The voice of the Shockmaster. We're not going to bait and switch and talk about Fred Ottman all night. Uncle Fred. I'm not going to talk about Uncle Fred.
Yes, so before we get into that, huge thank you to our newest member of the YouTube family, Austin Blackwell. I think I'm related to that kid. He's also a content creator, so I appreciate him being one of our newest mid-card champions on our subscription side of things. If you want to join over on YouTube, we have our YouTube and Patreon are ways you could do monthly donations. There is a monthly donation feature that will be coming soon to the audio side of things. So if you're one of the audio listeners, there'll be a way you can support there. Right now, it's just general support. Like the YouTube does get you some cool things. If you look at the tiers, if you have any questions with the tiers, we will steer you in the right direction. But currently we have 14 active members, which is super cool. So let's give them a shout out right now. So we have our tag team champions, Lily and James, and then our mid-card title holders, Freak Maniac, James M, CJ, DM, Andrea, Adam, Inspector Todd, BR, Steven Chambers, Devin the Tribal Chief, and A. So thank you all so much for that. If you want, I'll quick break it down for you. So our memberships are going to be. I was like, what is happening?
You have a running over there?
Yeah, I have a cat scratching at something and it scared the hell out of me. I was like, what is happening? Yeah, so we have our tiers. That's what I was getting to say before I had a heart attack. We have the tag team champions, which will get you cool emojis and also a little loyalty badge, and it'll give you shout outs like we just did now. And everything stacks. So whatever you get on the first tier, if you get the second tier, you get that too. Mid card gets priority to comments read. I still will read everyone's comments, but that gets the priority. World Championship gets we're gonna be making if we don't have a world champion yet, but if anyone joins World Championship and tier and up, I will be making new intro and outro videos with a thank you in the intro outro videos with your name or your plugs or whatever you want in there. Triple Crown will get early access on the community tab on YouTube to find out when new episodes drop before anyone else does or when I book somebody for an episode. And Grand Slam, you get early access to content before anyone else. That will be right now if you join. Every 5 question I have recorded that's going to last me up until April 22nd is all available for you guys to watch if you get that tier. Yeah, so a lot of cool stuff. So thank you guys so much. And as I say that, we get a super sticker. So a $1.50 super sticker from Freak Maniac. Thank you so much. And they're using that I love you ABJ emoji. There it is. All right. Anything you want to plug or get out before we start?
The usual. I'll throw it in the beginning of the show instead of the end of the show. PPW is one of the 8,000 indie promotions running on April 20th in Pennsylvania, in Eastern Pennsylvania. I think they all are. I think they all decided to run the same day.
Yeah.
So we did announce a few matches this week. This is our WrestleMania. So a lot of things that have been brewing for the last 3, 4, 5 months are going to all come to a head. We have announced. I'm trying to make sure I'm sticking with things we have actually announced. We have announced the double title ladder match. Think back to WrestleMania 10, 2 titles hanging above the ring: the U.S. title, the No Limits title. Rembrandt and Andy Header in a ladder match is official. Another big thing that has been brewing is the implosion of Team Big, the former tag team champions, Havoc and Big Dan Champion, who has announced he's going to be wrapping it up soon. So maybe one of your last chances to see Big Dan champion in PPW will be April 20th against Havoc in a Streets of Slatington match. That'll be a big one.
Does Gavin have to? I mean, I'm sure they're listening, but Gavin, I think a Big Dan champion costume is in effect for
Big Gav would be great. Big
Gav appearance,
especially after the very disappointing costume choice that Gavin made for the last PPW show.
But he broke a lot of hearts that night.
He did.
But and then Gavin loves the heel, man. That's secretly what he wants. Like
everybody secretly wants to be a heel. That's the big secret of professional wrestling. Everybody wants to be a heel. We've also announced for the trios titles the big rematch: Primal Fear against the Syndicate, Sam Adams and the Brothers Gray.
Well, I'll kind of throw a plug in right there. Just had the Brothers Gray on the ABJ podcast.
That's an outdated picture, though.
Yeah, that mustache is no longer there. But yeah, just had them on the podcast. And then when I announced my next guest, which will be this upcoming Tuesday, the Brothers Gray were not happy about it because I'm going to have Gabriel Hodder, of one member of Primal Fear, joining me on the podcast live this Tuesday. So come on,
reigning PPW Trios champions, Primal Fear.
Yeah.
And that's just going to be such a special thing. Those are two of the best trios going on the scene right now, and anytime they come together, it's special. And then the other thing, the other one I don't think we've officially announced yet. So I know we just recently announced GKM from the Ace of Space Academy. We saw him at the last AXW show in Hamburg back in December.
Is it Hootie? What's he say? Is it Hootie who?
I don't remember.
He does like it's like just he yells something. He has a yell.
But he'll be in action, as will Diego Hill making his comeback. So a lot of stuff going on. Tickets are available now at ppwwrestling.com. I'm done with my plugs.
All right. All that content's available. Just dropping this week, like we said, will be Gabriel Hodder on Tuesday. And then this Thursday will be Courtney Smith, very, very talented artist, tattoo artist. She does a little bit of everything. She'll be on the podcast Thursday as we review Terrifier, not Horrifier. If you want to grab some new merchandise, we have the ABJ podcast, New Japan, and then we have the MA version of it. There you go. New Dynamite logo. Mania's right around the corner. Grab those. And 316 just happened yesterday, but you can still grab your 570 and 666 t-shirts. It's the last time I'm plugging them. Out now. 5 Questions with Mike Skyros. 5 Questions with Mike Skyros is out tonight at midnight. Dylan Mesh, and then on Wednesday will be our buddy Ralph from the Opinion City podcast. And then Friday, is it going to be a fire starter with Junie Underwood? That's all I got. Upcoming content.
Huge goings on.
There's a lot of content, man. We're live almost every day doing a lot of fun things. Now the biggest, let's talk about some of the things that happened this week in professional wrestling. What are we got new music for The Rock. I guess we'll just start with Rock talk, right?
We've got new old music.
Music, yes.
The metamorphosis is complete because the Rock, for my book, his greatest run was that few months, and I believe it was 2003, where he was quote unquote Hollywood Rock, and he came back as a full heel. The crowd had kind of turned against him. He was booed against Hulk Hogan. He was booed when he was up for an award against Steve Austin, and he kind of took it personally. And he came back as a full out heel, and it was some of the best promo work you've ever seen. He did so much to get so many people over. He did a clean job to the Hurricane, or not somewhat clean. He got distracted, but he did a job for the Hurricane. And now The Rock is full heel. I know you've been very lukewarm. That's probably a nice way of putting it.
Yes.
To the Rock's run here. I thought that this past Friday on SmackDown, it all kind of came together, and The Rock is firing on all 8 cylinders now. He's found his swing. He's back in the groove a bit.
He knocked the cobwebs off. Does he still need 38 minutes to get something done, or is he wrapping them up a little quicker?
I don't care.
I just don't need an hour-long video on Twitter and then 48 minutes on Raw the next day.
I don't watch the Twitter stuff, so
yeah. I'm trying to keep up. I'm trying my best to subscribe to it, but it's just that world title picture. I'm so excited for the world title picture. I want to see the Cody Roman match because I thought last year's match was fantastic. We'll see how the elements play out. I think if they book it right and we have that big Avengers Endgame moment where everyone comes down to even the odds, and I think it'd be done literally it'd be Sanctuary season 13 when it was like like the Avengers End or whatever. If they do something similar to that, the internet will never hear the end of it. But also, I booked it first, but it would be a good way to be done because it was like, oh, here's your opposing force, and then here's your people rising up against the opposing force, and then it helps Cody win a title. You know,
a tale as old as time.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes it's just too easy, and it writes itself.
Yeah, and a lot of times where people get in their own way is they're like, oh, that seems too easy. It's always like, oh, it's too obvious. Well, yeah, it's obvious because it makes sense.
Yeah, sometimes obvious is fine. Yeah. They have to like everyone's Vince Russo where they're like, oh, all right, how do I 180 from right here?
Right.
Like,
you
don't
gotta,
always have to do that.
You got to throw the curve every now and then, but sometimes right down the middle is the way to go.
I totally agree. Anything else in this week of wrestling that caught your attention?
So I haven't seen it yet. I've heard very good things about the Bryan Danielson Katsuyori Shibata match on Collision. I've heard that.
Yeah, I wanted to see that, and then Brian Keith and Kyle O'Reilly. Kyle O'Reilly's debut back,
and obviously Mercedes Moné has debuted in AEW.
Officially in AEW. What did you think of her promo?
I thought it was fine. I thought they did a great job making her feel important. I thought they did a great job with that. If I had to critique anything from Dynamite on Wednesday, I think they kind of overstacked the beginning, and you could tell by the way they lost the audience at the end.
I was like, no, they're gonna do this match first. Something big's happening later, and it was just a run-in, and I was like,
and that match did not perform well in the ratings. Will Nightingale and Riho, and that's no slight against either of them, but they're not kind of pushed to that level where they should be main eventing your TV show at this point.
I thought it was I think Riho works better working.
She does
bigger talent. Like when she has to work, like her and Willow was actually a good match. Like she was landing on Willow looked believable. It scared the shit out of me because I thought she dropped her on her neck twice. But like
the match itself was fine. It just didn't hold the audience, and not everybody. I guess you have to have a little bit of a wrestling brain to say, okay, they're only putting this on last because Mercedes is coming back out.
Yeah. There's gonna be a run in.
Yeah,
but here's the thing: people watch that run in, and when I see that run and I go, okay, Mercedes just got a #1 contendership for Julia's title. Julia runs out and runs in and beats her down. Mercedes makes the save. Mercedes also called out Willow for being the injury that put her on the sidelines.
Yeah.
So it's like, it just seems to me that Willow's getting the title and then is probably dropping it to Mercedes.
Well, I don't think Mercedes is going to have the TBS title.
I don't think AEW sees them differently for titles. I think like a title's a title to them, and I don't see like I don't think the women's championship or the TBS have had enough recognition that one's clearly higher than the other right now.
I think this is just a way to keep Mercedes away from Tony Storm for a little bit. Have Tony do a little bit longer of a program with Deonna Purrazzo, and then you can maybe wait until, say, All In. Maybe even not that long. Maybe your All In match is going to be, say, Mercedes against Jamie Hayter or something like that.
I think these next couple weeks of AEW, they're going to start rolling out more returns of the people in the women's division.
Hopefully, because they've established Mercedes as a big deal, and now it's time to build on that.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of talent now. They have Deonna, they have Tony Storm, they have Mercedes. They have quite a bit of talent, and now Mercedes has that name value that they can get eyeballs on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the opening of the show did pull 1 million viewers in?
Yeah, they had 1 million for the first quarter hour, which was Mercedes' debut, but they did steadily drop. The only time they didn't really drop, the only time they held the audience was from 9 to 9:30, which was the Will Ospreay promo. Which, hey, that cements that Will Ospreay, is a star. He is somebody the audience accepts, because
for someone who's never really cut American promos, guy's killing it.
It's not like you had to learn English.
He said, like, he even said himself, like, I don't know how to do it in front of a crowd, and if I knock out of the park, or if I'm not knocking out of the park, because I never gauged those reactions to the fans because there was a translation barrier. You know what I mean? Like, and now he's doing it on a television scale company, and I think he's doing a great job.
And him and Danielson is a good piece of business. That's gonna be exciting. And then you had Darby Allin against Jay White, and unfortunately, Darby Allin breaks his foot in that match.
Yeah,
and he's not going to be climbing Mount Everest right now. But it's they painted they did some good framework building, and they seem to be stringing a few decent shows together here, which is a good sign.
Yeah.
It's a good sign.
Anything else?
No, I think that's
Nothing I can think of either.
Yeah, that's pretty much everything.
If you've missed church anytime in the past couple months, if on TikTok now, you can go and have former WWE superstar Elias read you Bible verses while he eats chicken sandwiches.
Okay, that's
I just scrolled across that today.
That's
it's
something I
wrestling.
won't be doing.
You can either give your money to Ryback because he goes online and he's like, give me money. We got to beat this guy. Or they have like have you seen TikTok battles?
No,
So
I'm
it's like
really
our camera and your camera, and then you bring all of your money marks, and I bring all my money marks, and then the money marks pay to prove that their guy is cooler because they gave money, and Ryback's making hand over fist money. People just donating money to him in these battles.
You know,
so that's that, and then Elias reads you the Bible. So it's like two opposites of former WWE stars on the same platform.
You know what? I'm with the government now. Just ban it. Ban TikTok.
No, don't ban it.
I'm done. I'm done.
I might need to win
the internet
battles.
was a mistake. The internet was a mistake.
Just unplug it all.
Yeah. Let's just go back to Usenet news groups
and no pigeons. Just go right back.
We're gonna bring back rec.sport.pro wrestling. That's where we're going.
All right. Well, let's get into our topic for tonight: the history of Ole Anderson,
the original Rock, as I think as Gavin's dad was said earlier, the original Rock, Ole Anderson, and that's the truth. I don't know if he was the original Rock, but he was the Rock before Don Morocco. He was the Rock before The Rock. He was at his start The Rock, or Rock Rogalski more specifically. But that is his real last name. Not like most of the Andersons in wrestling, not a real Anderson. To my knowledge of that family, the only person whose real last name was Anderson was Gene. Gene Anderson's real name was Gene Anderson. All the other Andersons are not Andersons, besides Gene's son, Brad Anderson. So it is Al Rogalski, born September 22nd, 1942. He is a Minnesotan, and a lot of those, besides Arn, a lot of those guys were originally Minnesotans, the Andersons. And he was a football player. I think he wrestled a bit in high school. He was a football player. He actually played for the University of Colorado, I believe. And then he was in the military for a little bit. He was stationed in Germany for a few years. I don't think it was during a war or anything, but he was a specialist in Germany. And he wound up getting in the wrestling. And this is the way a lot of wrestlers got in back in the day. If you were either like an amateur wrestler that kind of turned pro, so to speak, or you were related to somebody in the business, or in the case of Ole Anderson, a wrestler saw you at the gym and said, "Hey, he looks like a wrestler. Let's get him in here." So that
he looks like he can kill someone.
That's how Ole Anderson gets into pro wrestling. He was at a YMCA working out and was approached by a wrestler, Tiger Malloy, who not a very famous wrestler. I didn't really hear the name until I was
the first Tiger too.
Maybe. I know there was like a Tiger Conway Jr. or something like that. So he is trained like many wrestlers of his day, especially in Minnesota. If he came up in Minnesota, who trained him?
Vern,
yes, Vern Gagne. Vern Gagne trained him, and he did start in the late 1960s as Al the Rock Rogalski, or just Rock Rogalski, and sometimes he was even billed as being the nephew of Dick the Bruiser. So we're going back to last week. Sometimes they said he was related to Dick the Bruiser or even the Crusher, because he was Polish. He's related to the Crusher.
He's a big Polak, yeah.
And there's going to be a story about that a little bit later. So that was a very common thing back then. And this is very common, especially through Ole's career, of if you wanted to kind of get a guy started with a little juice behind him, you would just say he was related to somebody else that's already a star. So yeah, he's Dick the Bruiser's nephew. And so that is his whole thing in AWA.
Let's take a quick segue here. And this is this is inside baseball for us, or maybe the Northeast PA people. Or are we gonna even do like mainstream wrestling? You're coming into the business. You're BP Burke. Who you're related to?
Well, I always say I'm not related to Journey Burke. So I always say no relation. I could say I'm like the great grandson of Leo Burke. He's an old promoter. There's been a few Burks
But
around.
what if you can drop Burke and then you follow behind somebody?
I don't know. That's a question I'm not very prepared for. I
Let us know in the chat your picks. Who would I come in for? Who would I be related to, and who would BP be related to? I would probably be like Kevin Owens' cousin or something like that.
It's very funny though, because obviously let's totally shatter kayfabe. That's not my real last name. But it's a name I use because my grandfather used it. My grandfather was a boxer. My grandfather was very old compared to me. Like I'm older than some would probably think, but my grandfather was in his late. There we go.
You'd be an Okerlund.
I'm very mean.
I would come in as a heathen. I would take that all day long.
Yeah, I don't really do the heel thing anywhere, so Okerlund's a little more right down the middle.
Yeah.
So that would work. But my grandfather was a boxer, and he used the name Buddy Burke, and that's why I use that name. It's a lot easier to remember and spell and pronounce than my real name.
I would be related to Duke the Dumpster, and you would be Big Boss Man.
All right.
You don't have a face to be a prison guard.
You gonna serve hard time.
You would be a pushover as a prison guard.
Yeah.
You have what does your roommate, your co-host say? You have a face of a cherub. You have like a yeah.
It's not a heel face unless it's like I'm the descendant of George Crybaby Cannon or something like that. He was an old manager. You'd have to be that crybaby manager, the spoiled kid who just cries over anything. That's the only way. I don't. There you go.
That was his character.
Well, he was using his mom's money to buy wrestlers. That was Jim Cornette. He was the mama's boy. So Ole Anderson becomes Ole Anderson when he moves out of the AWA about a year and a half into his career, and he moves down to Jim Crockett Promotions in the Carolinas, where the Minnesota Wrecking Crew was an established tag team. And these are the original two Andersons of the Anderson wrestling family, Gene and Lars Anderson. So they are an established team down there, but they're bringing in Ole, so now they can do 6-man tags because Ole is their baby brother. So he is, again, he was the nephew of the Dick the Bruiser, and now he is the little brother of Gene and Lars Anderson. And it wound up being a thing where Lars went back to AWA because this is back when people didn't really, they called it homesteading if you were in a territory for a long time. And some people did that, like Jerry Lawler homesteaded in Memphis. Jerry Lawler didn't really travel the territories a lot. But usually, unless you were one of those few guys that did that, you worked a place for like 6 months to a year. You move to another place, rinse and repeat.
And would it also be like kind of like Lawler was like franchise tag? Like they paid him enough that he didn't have to travel?
Yeah, it was usually if you were making good money, you stayed in the place. But sometimes it'd be like, okay, you wore out your welcome, and it's not fresh anymore. It's getting a little
which is
stale.
Good. Why wrestling is the way it is right now, because when a guy in WWE has wore out his welcome or have done everything they can there, jump to AEW and vice versa. AEW, like I've been here 5 years. I've seen what I can see. Let me go stretch my legs somewhere else. That's good for wrestling.
Yeah, even into the 80s, like I always go back to Rick Rude. Everybody remembers Rick Rude's run of the WWF in like the late 80s, early 90s. He was only there for like 2.5, 3 years. He was not there for a long time. Like, but it's memorable. But that was a different thing where he had some issues with Vince and with money and stuff like that. But guys usually traveled a little bit back then, and Ole will do the exact same thing here. So Ole and Gene and Lars are a team, but then Lars is going back to the AWA for a little bit. So Ole and Gene become a tag team, and they're the and the teams are always called the Minnesota Wrecking Crew. They weren't called the Andersons or anything like that. They were called the Minnesota Wrecking Crew. And they had a style that would probably be best correlated these days to like an FTR when they're heels. They don't do anything fancy. They don't do anything. They're not going to. I mean, back then, fancy is like a drop kick. fancy is jumping off the second rope is fancy in the 70s. It's probably
imagine if someone pulled out a destroyer back then. You would be burned at the stake. Like
Well,
you're a witch. Like you
Yeah.
can't.
but it doesn't look. Nobody would want to do it back then because it didn't look real. Like it's like something's going on there. That's the guy getting dropped on his head is helping a little bit. It's not but it was back then. And this is something like Shayna Baszler does this to this day, and that's why she's going to be a great fit when she's doing Bloodsport. There's another thing, Shayna Baszler in Bloodsport.
Yeah.
So,
well, they said another WWE talent
Yeah.
will be named to be a Bloodsport as well.
I thought it was a joke, but it would be hilarious. Somebody's like Dominic Mysterio in Bloodsport would be hilarious.
God, could you imagine?
So
Lesnar, that's Lesnar's return.
Brock Lesnar in Bloodsport.
Bloodsport, Brock Lesnar.
Brock Lesnar in GCW. Yeah, let's do it. Put him in the clusterfuck too.
Could you imagine though?
The top two names from WWF in the clusterfuck are Brock Lesnar and Dink. Brock Lesnar and Dink. You're
And
gonna be in
Dink
the
goes
cluster
over.
match. Dink wins, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So the Minnesota Wrecking Crew quickly becomes one of the top tag teams in Mid-Atlantic and Jim Crockett Promotions. And that's a huge deal because Jim Crockett Promotions was known for the longest time as a tag team territory. So the tag teams were frequently at the top of the card. They were frequently the main event. Usually their main title was called the US title because you could have a world champion in a territory, but the tag team title was on equal footing in Jim Crockett Promotions or Mid-Atlantic Wrestling as the tag titles or the main title, the US title. So he did wind up going back to the AWA for a little bit, jump back and forth. And he was in Florida for a while. He was in Jim Crockett again. So we're leading up through the 70s, the early 70s. But this is where we kind of have to step away from Ole Anderson for a second to fully tell the story of Ole Anderson. So from like 1968 to 1974, roughly, he's jumping around a little bit. He's Rock Rogowski getting the AWA. He's doing the Minnesota Wrecking Crew in Mid-Atlantic with Gene Anderson. He's wrestling as a singles wrestler in Florida for Championship Wrestling from Florida. But as this is happening, something interesting is happening in Georgia. So Georgia Championship Wrestling was the Atlanta office. And it wasn't just Atlanta. That was like the home base. But they would stretch out in like West Virginia, even parts of Ohio. And the guy who owned that territory forever was a guy named Paul Jones. And it's not number one Paul Jones, the Paul Jones the people who followed 80s wrestling would think of, who was a manager for Jim Crockett. It was an older wrestler who was by the 70s kind of old, so and kind of out of it a little bit. But Paul Jones runs Georgia, and his right-hand man, who I think has a piece of the action and is his booker, is a guy named Ray Gunkel. And he's also the top star of the territory. And this is like the early 70s. And Ray Gunkel is the number one babyface. He's the booker. He's kind of Mr. Georgia, Mr. Atlanta at this point. And he has a match with a guy named Ox Baker, who is one of the all-time great heel-looking heels. If you ever seen a picture of Ox Baker, he is amazing. Just born and bred to be a pro wrestling heel. And he was also on The Price is Right one time, which is incredible. So Ox Baker is wrestling Ray Gunkel, and Ox Baker's finishing move was called the Heart Punch. And it was very simple, where he would pin your hand behind your left hand or left arm behind your head, and he would punch you right in the chest. And people would sell it like they were dead. So he has a match with Ray Gunkel. Ox Baker and Ray Gunkel have a match in 1972 where Ox Baker hits the Heart Punch. And I don't even know what the finish of the match was, but literally that night or soon after it, in the locker room, Ray Gunkel dies of a heart attack. And it probably was unrelated, but they treated it
Pro
like
wrestling.
treated it like Ox Baker killed that man with his heart punch. Ox Baker's heart punches killed a man. So
that's why when people said, like, listen, there's some things in wrestling that are like, oh, that's in bad taste, or that's this, or that's that. As long as you have clearance from the family, or I'm just saying, 9 times out of 10, if you have the clearance, go for it. Like when everyone said that right after Paul Bear died, and they were like doing the fake ashes and the urn of but they were like, Paul would have wanted that. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I'm in one more storyline after I'm dead. Please do that. Like,
about the Gunkel family. About that.
Not super into it, huh?
So at this point, Paul Jones is he's like the money guy, he's the owner, but he is kind of very hands off. And Ray Gunkel was running a lot of it. And so the plan from the NWA and the plan from Paul Jones and everybody is we're going to bring in Bill Watts. Bill Watts was very successful with stuff in the deeper South, even though it was called Mid South. It was really the deep South. He was running like Alabama, we're not Alabama, but Louisiana, Arkansas, places like that. So Bill Watts comes in to run Georgia, and Ann Gunkel, who is the widow of Ray Gunkel, is like, well, I thought I would just take over. I was helping Ray anyway. I thought I would be able to take over, and yeah, the woman's going to run a wrestling territory. Get out of here. Get out of here, Ann Gunkel. And so they pushed Ann Gunkel out. And Ann Gunkel started her own promotion, All South Wrestling. So there was a war between the official Georgia Championship Wrestling, which is being run by Bill Watts and Paul Jones, and Ann Gunkel's All South Wrestling. So it actually wasn't the blowout that most of these wrestling wars were either. Ann Gunkel was, for some points, winning. Like a lot of the crew that was the regular crew there took her side and worked for her, even though you were in danger of being blackballed by the NWA if you did that. And Ann Gunkel, most importantly, because TV was driving wrestling, she got the TV time slot because it had gone from the ABC station in Atlanta, which was WQXI, to this small station, WTCG, which would later become WTBS, named after the owner of the station, Ted Turner, and it eventually evolved into the TBS that shows Dynamite now, because once cable came around, it became a superstation.
Ryan Vox says, if I'm still relevant, use me in a storyline, just no Memorial Battle Royals. I disagree. I think we do the Ryan Vox Memorial Battle Royal, and everyone in it has to wear a mask and all wear the same gear. And then at the end, you find out who wins, because that's exactly how I learned about Roddy Radke the first time. Was he won a battle royal and took his mask off, and Ryan Vox got pissed off because it was like his rival.
The mystery battle royal. There you go.
It's the
Ryan Vox Memorial Mystery Battle Royal.
Yeah, okay. Yes, that's exactly how we booked that. That's if this podcast blows up, Ryan Vox doesn't even have to be dead. We're still it's the Ryan Vox Mystery Memorial Battle Royal. And everyone has to wear long sleeves, long black pants.
They have to look like the Dark Patriot.
Yeah. Everyone has to dress essentially like ninjas, and we can't see any skin. And you go out and wrestle, and we don't know who wins the battle royal until it's over.
So yeah, and
have a good time, commentary.
Oh yeah, that would be tricky, wouldn't it? Yeah, that would be very tricky. Ooh, yeah, that just gave me chills. So Ann Gunkel's kind of winning this thing. And there were even rumors that she and Ted Turner had a thing going. Like Ann Gunkel was like a former model. She was college educated. She was pretty savvy. But the NWA is not going to take this lying down. Bill Watts kind of moves out of it a little bit. And so now we have to bring in somebody to clean up this mess. And pro wrestling's kind of like the mob. So pro wrestling, you have that guy you call in when you need a problem to be taken care of. And when you imagine the guy who's going to come in and fix the problem, a lot of times you're thinking of like this big tough like leg breaker guy. But in pro wrestling in the 1970s, if you had a problem, oh my boy, you called that openly gay man with the glasses from Oklahoma. You called in Jimsy. So Jim Barnett is going to come in to Georgia in 1974, and he's going to fix the problem. He uses his connections, his political clout to ban Ann Gunkel's territory from Ann Gunkel's promotion from arenas. Basically says, no, if you work for her, you're done. You're done in the NWA. You're done. You're out.
It sounds like New Jersey right now, right?
And he brings in Ole Anderson as his booker. And that was pretty much the end of All South Wrestling. So Ole Anderson is now firmly entrenched as the booker in Georgia, and Jim Barnett is kind of running the show and is the primary owner. Paul Jones still has a little bit of a say in things, but Jim Barnett, the cleaner, the puppet master, the guy who knows how to play the game better than anybody is in control there, and Ole is his guy that's kind of doing the day-to-day booking.
Now, is there names that are a part of this other promotion that get buried here, or maybe we don't see in wrestling for a while because they were part of that? You worked for that promotion, your band.
No, usually the blackballing didn't last that long. It usually didn't.
Was there any notable names though that it hurt a little bit, or is that something maybe off the top of your head you can't really
off the top of my head? I can't think of anybody. Because if you have value to somebody, generally they're going to use you.
So realistically, back in the day, there's probably a few greenhorns who are like just trying to find a way, and they get buried. They get shrapneled here.
Yeah, and maybe like Bruno Sammartino was blackballed for a time. He had to go work in Canada. Jerry Lawler was blackballed for a time because he started with outlaw stuff. The Randy Savage and Lanny Poffo, Bob Roop. But Bob Roop was actually on the Georgia side of this.
Yeah.
Bob Roop was blackballed for a little bit, and Boris Malenko and Bob Orton Jr., because they were part of this thing called Plan B, where they basically exposed the business. But yeah, Gordon Soley was the commentary guy for Georgia Shapeship Wrestling, even though his home was Florida. He wound up coming up to Georgia, and this is the Saturday night 6:05. And my timing's a little off. I apologize. My timing's a little off. He came in as a talent first. He became the booker in 1976. Harley Race was the booker for a bit, but eventually Ole becomes a very successful booker. He had a legendary angle where he turned babyface. He had a bitter rivalry in the early 80s with Dusty Rhodes, and he turns babyface. And he's just he's doing everything he can to earn Dusty's trust. Everything he possibly can to earn Dusty's trust. And finally, after a year, Dusty's like, I trust you. I'll team with you against the Assassins in a cage. And the
and you just stab him in the back. You work a whole year, right?
Yeah.
That's how it ends. Yeah.
I'm going to team with you. It's going to be you and me against the Assassins in a cage. The two referees are heels, even because Dusty and Ole's like, oh, the two strongest forces in Georgia are coming together, so we got to stack the deck against them. It's going to be the Assassins, Gene Anderson, who stayed a heel, like Ole had a feud with his own brother, Ivan Koloff. They're going to be the referees. And as soon as that cage door closes, it's 5-on-1 on Dusty, and they just beat the hell out of him. And the angle works so well. They did the exact same thing 5 years later in Crockett with the formation. That's how the Four Horsemen was formed. The Four Horsemen, it was the Andersons against, and I could be getting part of this wrong. No, it was the Russians against Ric Flair and Dusty, and everybody turns on Dusty. And everybody turns on Dusty. And both times they did it, it caused a near riot because fans were literally trying to climb the cage to get in there and save Dusty. Both times. And there's a legendary interview about, it's like a 10-minute interview back when that wasn't a thing, where Ole Anderson was explaining, like, not even my friends knew I was doing this. I had to act like I had betrayed my brother. I betrayed all my friends just to get you to believe me, Rhodes. Just to get, like, it was perfectly logical. It was all perfectly laid out. And it was one of the most well-crafted heel turns in the history of pro wrestling. So that's one of the bigger pieces of business that Dusty did. Tommy Rich was really, really over as a babyface. And this was more of a Barnett move, but they got the NWA to approve Tommy Rich winning the NWA title for like a week from Harley Race. And Ole Anderson he even came up with two gimmicks that are all-time great gimmicks in this point. He created the Road Warriors. He brought in Hawk and Animal before they were even Hawk and Animal, and created the Road Warriors. So that was Ole. And he came up with a lot of the gimmick for the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant, because
really?
he had him originally as a heel because he had gotten word that he was doing great stuff in Mid Atlantic for Crockett, and he was going to be King James Valiant, and he was a heel King James Valiant. It wasn't working. He was like, well, what do they have you doing in these other places that you're so popular? Like, oh, I'm a babyface there. So he became the Boogie Woogie Man. He started having like the street people and the whole mannerisms, everything that made Jimmy Valiant for the rest of the way was kind of done by Ole. So things are moving on pretty well in Georgia, and Ole is successful enough that he even buys into the company. Like, he gets a share. Like, Barnett's still the main guy. Paul Jones still has a little piece of it. But Ole Anderson and the Briscoe brothers all wind up as part of the ownership. They all have a little piece of the action. So this is a point where Jim Barnett has his fingers in a lot of pots here. He's moving and shaking in the background because he is one of the first people that Vincent K. McMahon brings on board when he buys Titan Sports from his father, or Capital Wrestling from his father, and makes it Titan Sports. Jim Barnett was with Vince McMahon when Vince McMahon came in and pulled the WWF out of the NWA in 1983. So, but he still runs Georgia. So Ole's getting a little paranoid here, and rightfully so, because Vince is out to get everybody. Vince is out to take over. And he wants to become, this is what we were talking about earlier, about his Polish background. So he does a thing. He saw some movie where people like cut their hands and shook hands to become blood brothers. And he says to the Briscoes, who are both Native American, I think they're Choctaw Native, but they are indigenous. And so he says he wants to cut their hands and shake with the Briscoes to become blood brothers. And they're like, we're not going to become blood brothers with no fucking pull, basically. so that happened. But it kind of telegraphs what's going to happen here, because and this
one
is
one of those brothers became Vince's good right hand man for a very long time.
Here we go. Here's where it happens. So a lot of wrestling fans are probably familiar with Black Saturday, and that's what this all leads up to. Because Vince McMahon, he didn't really want Georgia Championship Wrestling. He wanted their time slot, because this is when cable TV is starting to get a foothold. And one of the things that Georgia Championship Wrestling really had going for it is that TBS became a cable station. TBS started out as a local UHF station in Atlanta, and Ted Turner bought a satellite and became a cable channel. And WTBS was broadcast across the country on cable. And at this point in 1984, the only two big TV deals that a wrestling promotion have with a national cable TV network is WWF Steel with USA to do Tuesday Night Titans, and Georgia Championship Wrestling was airing Saturdays at 6:05 on TBS. And it's the mothership. It's what became WCW Saturday Night. So Vince didn't really want Georgia. He wanted the time slot. He wanted 2 hours of TV on TBS. That's what he really wanted, because at this point, he's starting to really plant the seeds for WrestleMania. It's still it's still a little less than a year away, but he knows that another cable outlet is a big part of his plans. And Ole will absolutely not sell. Like he tried to, a lot of times Vince tried to buy people out. And I mean, sometimes he wouldn't pay. He would agree to pay. Hey, this sounds familiar. He would make the first payment and then not make any of the other payments. When other time did that happen with Vince McMahon?
Well, that backfired recently, huh?
Yep. He did the same thing to Stu Hart and Stampede. Like, he bought out Stampede Wrestling, made the first payment, and then never made another one. So Stu started promoting again. But there's always that. They always kept making nice because Brett worked there. So Stu was never going to really go after Vince because Brett worked there, and he wanted being taken out on Brett. But he tried to buy the AWA. Vern said no. He tried to buy Georgia Championship Wrestling, and Ole said no. Ole didn't say no because Vince and Linda came down to do it, and he said, F you and your wife, is what Ole said to Vince McMahon, basically. Because I think when Vince couldn't do it, they had Linda come in and be like, the little more reasonable, like, oh, Vince is just a hothead, and like, F you and your wife is what he told Vince. So Vince is like, okay, I can't get Ole to sell. I'm just going to get all of Ole's partners to sell. So one by one, Jim Barnett sells to Vince. The Briscoes sell to Vince. He's very old, and at this point, he sees what's going to happen. No matter what he does, Paul Jones sells to Vince. Like everybody that Ole Anderson was partnered with sold out, and he was the only one that didn't. So basically, Vince McMahon becomes the principal owner of Georgia Championship Wrestling, and he gets the time slot on WTBS. So that leads to Saturday, January 14th, 1984, Black Saturday, where instead of Gordon Soley at the WTBS studio, it's Vince McMahon. And he's going to introduce us to the superstars of the World Wrestling Federation. So
now, maybe somebody in the chat can help us out with this, maybe Steven or Ryan, but like, what's the general viewpoint of those fans back then? Like, say you go to tune in to AEW.
Getting there. Yeah. We're getting there. We're getting there because they did not, first of all, they were used to having live studio wrestling, like wrestlers actually wrestling in the TV studio with live matches, and Vince was showing tape matches. And it was the cartoonish, not as athletic WWF style where they were used to their wrestling. They were used to the style of wrestling they had seen for years. And it didn't go well. It didn't go well. They said like the switchboards at TBS's studios were just ringing off the hook because where's Gordon Soley? Why is this wrestling on and not the wrestling I like? It was not well received at all.
It's like if Monday Night Raw was going to come on and they're like, for tonight only, we have a special episode of AEW Dynamite for you guys.
Yeah.
But it's not told until 9:00.
Yeah, or vice versa. Yeah, because we didn't have the internet back then. News didn't travel so fast. People found out when Vince McMahon showed up on their TV. Yikes. And the actual show's on YouTube. And the ratings plummeted. The ratings did horribly. It was just not. It was so bad that Ted Turner was like, I got to do something about this. Ted Turner was like, I got to get Vince out of there. But Vince had a contract. Like they had a contract for that time slot. So they wound up putting other wrestling on, and Ole Anderson even starts up his own company called Championship Wrestling from Georgia.
He can't have you and your wife promotions.
Pretty much. He can't do Georgia Championship Wrestling, but he can do Championship Wrestling from Georgia. There was nothing in the contract that now Vince had through Georgia Championship Wrestling that said that was the only wrestling that TBS could air. He was contractually obligated to keep them at Saturdays at 6:05 for 2 hours. So Ole's TV gets on at like 7:45 or 7:30 in the morning, 7:35 in the morning on like a Sunday. So Championship Wrestling from Georgia is a thing for a little bit. And a lot of the old Georgia guys went with it because at this point, the NWA is starting to splinter. It's just basically Vince against the world. So like Bob Roop is still there. And at this point, Arn is still around. So Championship Wrestling from Georgia is there, but it's fledgling. It's not doing so well. And there's a lot of competition because Bill Watts is on. Bill Watts signs a deal. He has Mid-South Wrestling, which was on fire. It was very popular. People loved it. Like it still looked back on fondly as a great wrestling program. So Bill Watts has a time slot on before Vince, but he's doing so much better in the ratings that basically it was kind of like Ryan Vox is correct there. He says I really don't recall it happening. I still thought the NWA and WWF were like the American and National League in baseball. Yeah, because a lot of times the name of the promotion wasn't even out there. It was just wrestling. Like the name of the show wasn't Georgia Championship Wrestling. It eventually became World Championship Wrestling, which is why when Turner bought the company, he renamed it World Championship Wrestling because that was the name of the TV show. Mm-hmm. So Bill Watts is running a show, and both of those shows, both Mid-South and Championship Wrestling from Georgia, even though they're on worse time slots, are doing way better than the WWF show. And it's like, okay, we gotta get Vince out of this time slot. How does it happen? And when there's a problem in wrestling, who do you call?
That openly gay guy?
You called Jimsy.
You called Jimsy in.
Vince, my boy, we got to get out of this. So Jim Barnett, Ted Turner calls up Jim Barnett and says, what do we do here? We got
a mover and a shaker, that guy.
Jim Barnett is gonna fix everything to a degree. So basically a deal is brokered to sell that.
Did we do an episode on him?
Jim Barnett, yeah.
Yeah, but the way back, yeah.
Yeah. So Jim Barnett brokers a deal where Vince McMahon is going to sell that time slot, that 6:05 time slot on Saturdays, to Jim Crockett for $1 million. So Jim Crockett takes over, and Vince uses that $1 million.
$1 million when?
1985.
Okay.
Which Vince McMahon used a lot of that $1 million to basically fund WrestleMania, because WrestleMania was coming up. And USA winds up giving another 2-hour block to WWF because they're doing great ratings on USA because that's their audience. And that's where primetime wrestling is born. So Ole Anderson tries
in 1985, $1 million contract in today's time would be $2,913,000.
Yeah, but that's for TV. TV was the lifeblood of wrestling, and that was
still a big deal.
Crockett was doing great there. It wasn't until it just became Crockett versus Vince, and that's when Crockett started to kind of crumble a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So Ole winds up. At first, he did try to keep Championship Wrestling from Georgia going. It didn't last that long. It lasted about a year. And essentially kind of just folded into Jim Crockett Promotions. So Ole is now a talent for Jim Crockett in 1985. He's wrestling with Arn as the Minnesota Wrecking Crew. And 1985 is also when they become the Four Horsemen. So
would this sorry, I'm not trying to cut you out. I'm trying to maybe put it into today's times. That money to buy the Vince out and get that time slot. This really solidifies the early ground stages of WCW essentially forming and becoming the competition.
Yes. It's the beginning of the relationship between Jim Crockett Promotions and Ted Turner. So people are realizing
us solo isn't going to be enough to take down this Titan, so to say, from Titan Enterprise. We have to work together at some point here.
Kind of. There was an attempt at that called Pro Wrestling USA, and everybody's egos got in the way. Yeah. Everybody wanted to be in charge. Everybody wanted their guy to be the main guy. Fritz von Erich wanted his sons to be the guy. Vern Gagne wanted it to be, I think, Rick Martel.
All tag team wrestling.
Pro Wrestling USA was more of what that was. And basically, everybody not everybody, but a lot of these smaller things like Georgia Championship Wrestling from Florida, they all kind of, they're a lot of their talent that didn't go to Vince got absorbed by Crockett, and then Crockett literally bought Mid-South when it became the UWF. But a lot of the UWF struggles was because they were out of Louisiana, East Texas, Arkansas, and the areas they ran were the economy in those areas was very dependent on the oil industry. And when the oil industry crashed in the late 80s, that was the end of the UWF. That was the end of Bill Watts's promotion, which then got bought out by Jim Crockett. So Ole is basically now just going to be a wrestler.
I got to step one quick and unlock the door. I'm going to let you rock.
That's fine. So Ole is part of the Four Horsemen now. He's in a tag team with Arn. But this is kind of the end of his run as a full-time wrestler. In fact, he gets kicked out of the Horsemen. He's the first of the original Horsemen to get kicked out because he was spending a lot of time away. He was taking time off of wrestling to go and see his son, Brian, who became a wrestler, briefly wrestle. And he would wind up becoming a babyface against the Andersons, and he would wrestle in Japan for a little bit. He would team up with Lex Luger for a little bit. But it was very much kind of the end of his run, and he had essentially retired as a full-time regular wrestler by around 1988. And he would come back for a little bit. He did wind up reuniting the Minnesota Wrecking Crew in the late 80s, and he wound up being kind of the catalyst for the heel turn for Ric Flair in 1989, or 1990, where Sting won the Iron Man tournament, and Sting's going to challenge Ric Flair for the title now, but that means you're not a horseman. So Ole was kind of the semi-active wrestler, but more of taking that J.J. Dillon role of being the guy who was really the mouthpiece for the Horsemen, not in so much as they needed one. And and the late 80s is also when he really gets a lot of creative control too, and into the 90s, because Dusty was always the booker. Dusty gets fired in the late 80s, and they have a bit of a booking committee, but there were times around 1990, 1990 and even a little bit later, he winds up being the head of the booking committee. Ric Flair was always part of that too, but Ole winds up being the head of the booking committee and introduces some very dubious things like the Black Scorpion, which was this was a directive from the Turner people, where Ole is they're basically telling the booking committee, we want some kid-friendly ideas, some more cartoonish, outlandish ideas to compete with WWF. So they have like Brad Armstrong was very briefly Arachnaman, a Spider-Man knockoff. You had Art Barr's the Juicer. He's doing a Beetlejuice gimmick. You had Brad Armstrong was also the Candy Man. He was give out candy to kids. You had one of the most infamous ones was the Ding Dongs. They were a team that had they were masked guys. They could be in the Ryan Vox Memorial Battle Royal. Masked guys in full bodysuits that had little bells attached to them, and they had a big bell.
So everyone in the Rumble is going to be Ding Dong number, and then
it's going to be the Ryan Vox Memorial Ding Dong Battle Royal.
Yes,
I love it.
And everyone has like a number on them, like 1, 2. So commentary be like Ding Dong 1 hits Ding Dong 6. Ding Dong 5 has been eliminated, and when you get eliminated, you unmask. I honestly I don't hate this booking at all.
I do. I loathe it. I loathe it.
I think it's entertaining.
Ole was also around when they did Sting and RoboCop for Capital Combat, but that was more of like a cross promotion thing, because I believe RoboCop was a New Line Cinema thing, and that was a Turner promotion. He was Office for a while. He was Office. He I think his last matches were in like 1990. He was a referee for a little bit. He became the booker when Bill Watts came in to run the company for a little bit, and when he was taken out as executive vice president, Ole was booking for a little bit in 1993 when Eric Bischoff was kind of like the EVP for a little bit. And then he kind of had that job until Flair came back, and then Flair was head of the booking committee. So Ole Anderson, and at this point is the time they bring in another character. One thing we didn't mention about the Black Scorpion is Sting. He talked like this. He would say, Sting, remember El Paso, 1984. And it was the deep, gravelly voice of Ole Anderson. And Ole voiced another character in 1993 when he was in the talent relations area. So he was...
Just when you think this horse couldn't get beat anymore, Haku laughing at it just resparks.
He was the voice of the Shockmaster. Yes. He was the voice of the Shockmaster. So that was when Bob...
don't you hear him on the Michael? What the hell? Doesn't he like... He's so pissed that it went down. Like the voice of the Shockmaster is him going, "What the hell?" Just
well, they say he delivered the line, and then as soon as he was done talking, he turned the mic off and just started like laughing, and like, "What the hell was that?" Yeah, all he was just like flabbergasted. So I misspoke. Eric Bischoff was not running things at this point. Bob Dew, who was like an office guy for Turner, was. And then when Bischoff comes in, and big Steven Chambers in chat, biggest stormtrooper. Yeah, literally the Shockmaster helmet was a stormtrooper helmet that they painted with glitter paint.
We've seen it. We've seen the helmet. I don't know if it's the original helmet, but
I don't know either. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Tugboat brought it with him.
Mm-hmm.
So when Eric Bischoff takes over in 1994, Ole and him did not see eye to eye. Bischoff was a very modernized guy, and Ole's a very old school guy. And so Bischoff Bischoff put Ole in charge of the power plant, which was their training facility. And one of the last things he did was he was put into the Hall of Fame at Slamboree 94, which I was at, which we're going to cover probably in May. And he wound up kind of leaving WCW a little bit later that year and was pretty much out of wrestling by then. But he was a guy who did well with his money. He made a lot of money because he was also office and as well as a top drawing wrestler. And he was on top in Georgia for a long time. He was on top in Georgia from like 1976 to about 1985. So he made a lot of money there and he invested it well. He bought a lot of real estate. He bought a sawmill. He had a lot of outside business interests. So after he was done with WCW in 1994, he really was done with wrestling. He, again, a notoriously curmudgeonly guy who was really didn't have much good to say about anybody. Everybody was awful. Everybody, he did it better. He could have booked it better. And again, he's not without his merits because Ole Anderson is
He's essentially Cornette before Cornette got a podcast.
Yeah, and not as funny. And Cornette's working a little bit with it too. Cornette knows what he's doing.
Cornette's probably showing shades of Ole in his bit.
Yeah. Because Cornette is kind of like the Howard Stern of wrestling podcasters. Because I always think of that line from the movie. It's like, well, the people who love him listen for an hour and a half. The reason they most give, I want to see what he says next. The people who hate him listen for 2 hours. They want to see what he says next.
Yeah.
So yeah, Ole was very much he had the reputation for being the cranky guy. He would always bury Ric Flair. He would never come back for anything. He did write a book or co-authored a book. It was probably ghostwritten in 2003, Inside Out: How Corporate America Destroyed Professional Wrestling. But his legacy is that he was one of the great heels of the late 70s, early 80s. He got stabbed at least one time by like a 70-year-old man. And
if you were a heel in the 60s, 70s, 80s and didn't get stabbed once, you weren't doing your job.
You weren't a very good heel.
Yeah, you weren't sure shit.
But yeah, again, he was got quite the legacy. There's also some like a lot of people accused him of being quite racist. He threw around a certain word very liberally. But he was also like he was relatively close with people like Thunderbolt Patterson, who's going to the Hall of Fame right now, with Ernie Ladd and him got into some arguments, but Tony Atlas has spoken highly of Ole Anderson in the past, but a complicated guy with a complicated history. But all you got to say is like he created the Road Warriors. That's all you got to know. Like he did some things right as a wrestler and as a creative force.
So I have in the chat below, or scrolling across the bottom, who are your favorite bookers in pro wrestling history? And I want to pose that to our live chat who is here with us today. If you are listening to this and you're on the audio side of things, make sure you hit a 5-star review and a follow wherever you're listening. I think we're getting really, really close to like 100-star reviews on Spotify and leave a review on Apple. Sometimes I get alerts when reviews go up. If you leave a review on the Spotify or Apple side of things, I should see it and I'll be able to read comments in the next episode, as well as in the chat. If you're live in the chat, tell us who your favorite bookers are. And BP, I want to kind of pose this to you. Does Ole Anderson crack your Mount Rushmore of bookers in pro wrestling?
So Mount Rushmore is going to mean top 4.
Yes.
And it's a maybe. If he's not top 4, he's close. You have to put Eddie Graham on there. Eddie Graham was the owner and booker of Florida, because every great booker that came after Eddie Graham learned from Eddie Graham. So Eddie Graham must be on that list, and he's probably number 1. And then it gets a little. You gotta have Dusty up there, I think, too, because Dusty's creativity and it kind of trailed off a little bit, but Dusty kept Crockett going. Dusty really kept Crockett going for a long time, and until he didn't. he was great until he wasn't, which is the story of most bookers. It's the story of Ole Anderson. He was firing on all cylinders when he did that turn in 1980, but he also did the Black Scorpion. So. And it's not going to be a popular thing, and it's not going to be and he definitely has his flaws, especially as a human being, and even as a creative person in pro wrestling. But how can you not say Vince McMahon? Like, look at the success he had.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be your style of wrestling. It might not be what you want of wrestling, but look at the success he had.
Yeah.
So maybe Ole gets that fourth spot. That fourth spot is up for a lot, up between a lot of guys. Paul Heyman, Ole, Jim Cornette, I'll say it. Even though Smoky Mountain, I didn't really follow a whole lot of Smoky Mountain, but and then you can talk about people in Japan. I know in the chat we saw Rossy Ogawa, who was the booker for Stardom. Geto had a lot of great years in New Japan, but it's a completely different thing. I'm thinking like more of the American booking style. Maybe Ole is that fourth guy. Jerry Jarrett is definitely in the discussion. If we're going to talk about longevity, if we're going to talk about
Jareds are like cockroaches.
Jerry Jarrett is probably going to be my fourth. I think if I do a Mount Rushmore of bookers, it's going to be Eddie Graham, Dusty Rhodes, Vince McMahon, Jerry Jarrett. Because and it hurts to kind of leave like a Heyman off of there, but I think a lot of what Heyman did in ECW is I'm taking Jerry Jarrett and I'm putting a little bit of an edge to it. Because there's a lot of overlap between ECW and Memphis, a lot. And Memphis was doing the soap opera wacky storytelling. I think Vince McMahon's booking owes a lot to Jerry Jarrett because Memphis had some goofy stuff too. A lot of the goofy stuff was Lawler, because for a while, like Lawler would book half the year and Jarrett would book half the year, and when Jarrett would book, you'd have these like well thought out, sensical stories, and then when Jerry would book, you would have a Frankenstein and Tagar, Lord of the Volcano. How would I rank Vern and Stu? Creatively, I think it's kind of that difference between bookers and writers. Like I don't know a whole lot about Stampede.
I would say they're great trainers. I think they've created a lot of great wrestlers.
Well,
I don't know how
Vern, I mean, AWA had a lot of great years, and you got to give Vern credit for that. But as far as creating memorable angles, memorable characters, I think they're a step below like the Eddie Grahams and the Dusties and the of the world.
It's crazy because Vern and Stu could be in the same boat as also like a Dusty, and like you think of people who've trained people to become stars. Like who has trained more wrestlers to be the next big thing? Like Vern and Stu got to be on that list, right?
Yeah, Vern and Stu 100%. Yeah, Vern and even like Eddie Sharkey. A lot of those guys fed into the AWA system. Eddie Sharkey trained like Rick Rude and a few other people, but Larry Sharp, of course.
Yeah,
Alpha and that Wild Samoan family.
They're doing all right. The Samoans are doing pretty good for themselves.
Yeah, they're doing pretty good too. Yeah. So, but yeah. If I had to pick four of my Mount Rushmore bookers, it's going to be Eddie Graham, Dusty, Vince, and Jerry Jarrett.
Yeah,
but Ole's definitely in the top 10. Ole might be Ole might be number 5.
So we're kind of looking through the calendar, and we see that next week, our next Sunday, we're going to be reviewing WrestleMania 1. So we kind of led in breadcrumb wise into this.
Everything's feeding into itself, and that wasn't intentional. Like
that's kind of fun.
The Crusher, Ole is the nephew of the Bruiser, and now Black Saturday leads right into WrestleMania. So it is kind of interesting how that works.
So we're going to do WrestleMania 1. We're going to do the 31st, and then we're going to be taking the 7th off. Obviously, the 7th is WrestleMania Night 2. Yeah, I will be live doing a hangout. So if you're not in Philly or you're at home and you're watching by yourself, come join the live chat and hang out with me while we watch WrestleMania from the comfort of our own homes. But so we will be back on the 14th. But that 31st episode, you're thinking, well, what's going to close out the month of March? And we decided, because one half of this story is Cody and the other half is Roman. Cody's main thing that he's pushing for his story is to tell the story his dad never got to tell. So what better story to tell is the history of the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, right before Mania. That's what we're going to do. So on the 31st, it will be the history of Dusty Rhodes, and then we'll take a week off. Everyone enjoy Mania. Come hang out here during the hangout session, and Tornado Tag will be back on the 14th, and we don't have an episode yet. So
suggestions are welcome.
Yeah, and we might also do a tornado tag on Monday or possibly Tuesday. We'll see
Yeah.
how it works out, and then that episode in between there will be us recapping 2 nights of WrestleMania.
Yeah, on Monday I will be coming back from Philadelphia, so I will it will be dependent on when I arrive, basically.
Yeah, so we will do another one in between there. It won't be on on a Sunday. Actually, there you go. Lily has one. How about the history of the bloodline, like the Samoan
That
one?
would be an interesting one. Another interesting one would be Rocky Johnson. If we're talking, well, that's not really a Roman thing, but Rocky Johnson, The Rock's dad, who was a very very big star of the territories.
If we do this episode, I have to make some calls.
Yeah,
I mean, we can have some people on.
well, one of the people you're thinking of might be getting signed, so I don't know if he'll be available.
Yeah. Yeah, we can see what we can do. We could have a possible guest. And then no pressure, Brian, to tell this person their family history.
All about yeah. A fact checker who could tear your throat out. That'll be fun. That'll be a lot of fun.
You're like, in 85, Alpha Sika, and they're like,
nope,
no, that's not what happened. That's not what happened. Nope. We might look like assholes on this episode. We'll see. We'll see how it works out. But yeah. So we have that coming up, and then we have a lot more stuff throughout the month. Also, make sure you check the links below to follow myself and BP on all social media. Maybe not so much BP. I don't know if he wants his business out there.
Yeah, I've had it in my head that I have to do a separate like gimmick.
A gimmick.
Social media,
yeah.
I gotta have the shoot social media and the BP Burke social media.
Yeah.
So maybe it is time to kind of because I got a lot going on. Not a lot going on now. But
you're a booker now. You're an Ollie.
I am not a booker. I am not an Ollie. I don't like to mention who I am. But I love you.
Yeah. You're definitely a Pritchard. But also links below if you want to support the Ben Frank Connection, which is myself, and the Opinion City podcast. And there's a few other randoms that are thrown in there who are part of our family. But we have some new merchandise out right now, which is the Bullet Club inspired ones. There's the ABJ Club, the Royalty Club, which is Ralph's shirt, Russell Club, which is Parmesan, and then we got the Lily shirt, Witchcrafts by Lily. So all those go helping keep the StreamYard alive, so we can keep making more content for all of you.
And some other fun things coming up. I've probably mentioned it next week more, but the 28th, if I have my day right, I believe it is the 28th. I will be, if you're close to Pottsville, Pennsylvania, I will be at Pilgaroo Brewing hosting WrestleMania trivia.
Did you get your free beer?
I did not. I paid for beer at Pilgaroo.
That's probably a smart move.
Yeah, I was there for a while yesterday. And as I was leaving, I'm like, I think I've had enough beer. I do not want a free beer. I've had my fill of beer at an awesome place. Had a great time. We celebrated Austin 316 Day. At 316, there was a toast for Stone Cold Steve Austin.
It's beautiful.
And it was a fun time all around. But I will definitely be there on.
I got way too 420 on 316.
There you go.
Yeah, it was bad. It was crazy.
So yeah, if you're in the Pottsville, Pennsylvania area, come on down to Pilgaroo on the 28th of this month. It's a Thursday night for wrestling trivia. Yours truly will be the host. I'm the Ken Jennings of wrestling trivia. I was so good at it, they made me the host.
They had to. You're cleaning up.
So it's literally going to be one question for every WrestleMania. All 39 WrestleManias that we've had so far get one question each.
Nice.
Which should be fun. It should be a fun time.
I love it. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We had a lot of people right at the end over on Twitch. Huge thank you to Will the Gray, also a content creator. He's part of the River City Radio, who also followed. So thank you so much to them. Make sure you go follow their channels as well. They were live right before I was. A name I'm not sure of. First one I seen was Laser Neon. So huge thank you to them for hanging out. We hope to see you more. Check out our Discord, man. We have a really cool community. That's probably where I'll be immediately following this show after I say my pleasantries to Brian in the backstage area, but I'll be over in the Discord hanging out with you guys. Tons and tons of content coming your way. Once again, to our newest member on the YouTube channel, Austin Blackwell, thank you so much. And for our $1.50 peach, I had to go back and check what it was because they don't show the photo here. That's the peach one. Freakomaniac sometimes goes to horny jail, and the only way he can get out is what is a $1.50 donation so he can drop peaches in the chat. So we all love a good peach here on the ABJ podcast side of things. So thank you so much for that $1.50 donation tonight. So there you go, man. Moving up. How about the world where we're making donations during shows?
It just dawned on me that I have to watch WrestleMania 1 now. I was just thinking about that and like, oh boy.
Yeah, so do your homework.
Not the best Sunday, show. Not the best show, but it's very historically significant.
Yeah, do your homework for next Sunday at 9:00. So we will.
If we have to watch it, you do too, okay?
Yes. So get ready for next Sunday, 9:00 for WrestleMania 1. That'll do it for Tornado Tag. Also, if you're here, hit subscribe if you're new. Also, tell your friends about the channel. Let's grow. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, so all that help means the world to us. We are also on Twitch, YouTube, Facebook. They're all over the place, as well as on your favorite audio podcast platform. So you can check us out on audio, Spotify, as well as Google, our Apple, whatever it may be. And if you really, really like this Tornado Tag stuff, below is all of our stuff from my old channel for Tornado Tag, where we've done over 200 episodes before it kind of carried over. Yep. So there's a lot of content out there if you're really enjoying what you like. And we'll get one more donation before the stream ends from Freak Maniac. I don't know what that picture is of. I think it's just a regular donation. But thank you so much. We've now made.
He's prepaying for his horny jail.
Yeah, prepaying for his horny joke. Thank you so much for the donations. It means so much. Like I said, I think that might be the first ever live donation during a Tornado Tag. I think you might be the first one to do that. So we'll see you guys next time. Here's some music by the Converse Kid. We're out of here. Have a good one.
Thanks for watching this presentation. Like, share, and subscribe for more.